Listening is a key skill for professional success. Our ability to listen affects not only how other people judge our competence as communicators, it also affects how other people judge our overall performance at work. Because technological advances have expanded the number of choices we have about how and when to listen, it is particularly important for us to learn to develop active listening skills so that we can be certain that we're not missing important messages from others. Listening serves 4 key purposes. First, we listen to acquire information. This may place different demands on our listening skills based on the importance or complexity of the message to which we're listening. Secondly, we listen to screen and evaluate the many messages that we receive each day so that we can avoid becoming overloaded with all the information that's coming our way. Third, we listen to enjoy and to relax, which are important for our good mental health, but they can become problematic if we take a too relaxed approach to listening in certain situations. Finally, we listen to get along with other people. This is important in developing the relationships that will help us succeed professionally and personally. So what do good listeners do differently from poor listeners? Well, first of all, good listeners take the time and make the effort to listen in an active manner. You see, most people tend to default to a passive listening approach. Passive listening is listening without putting forth real effort, without really being concerned about what's communicated. And people listen passively all the time and for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we're simply bored with the message and maybe we think we've heard it before. Perhaps we're just tired physically or mentally, so it's difficult for us to put out the effort that's required. Sometimes we listen passively because we're apathetic about the message or the person from whom we're receiving it. Active listening, on the other hand, requires making a substantial effort to pay full attention to what's being communicated. Active listening is important. It increases your ability to understand messages by increasing the engagement and care with which you listen. Active listening can also encourage greater enthusiasm and appreciation on the part of the person sending the message, making it easier for them to communicate the points that they need to make. And active listening is also crucial for successfully navigating disagreeable or uncomfortable interactions. Another important difference between good listeners and poor listeners is that good listeners actually look like they're listening. There are visible, nonverbal characteristics that can differentiate good from poor listeners. Good listeners, for example, focus their full attention and concentration on the communicator. They signal this by offering eye contact, looking right at the communicator. They also use their bodies to create a sense of openness and receptivity, perhaps leaning slightly forward to indicate that they're actually paying attention. And good listeners also can use facial expressions to communicate interest. So then a person might wonder, who is actually responsible for listening? Is it the speaker? Is that person responsible for creating an interesting or intriguing message, or is it actually the listener's responsibility to listen? Well, it turns out that both people are responsible for listening. Senders have a responsibility to understand the content that they want to communicate before they open their mouth to talk about it. They're responsible to carefully consider how they're going to communicate their message. They're responsible to ensure that the message is appropriate for the context or occasion. They should design the message with the particular receiver in mind, and they should be mindful about the implications of the message that they're sending. However, receivers or listeners also have several important responsibilities. Listeners are responsible for making an effort to actually listen. They should also consider the physical and social context of the message. It's important for listeners to give the sender a fair hearing before they provide the sender with feedback. And finally, listeners are responsible for managing their own response to the message and the way that it is communicated. Self-talk influences the way that we listen to other people. Now, what is self-talk exactly? Well, this is the process of sort of having a conversation with yourself as you're engaged in a listening situation. And self-talk is affected by both self-concept and self-esteem. Self-concept is sort of the opinion that I have about who I am. Self-esteem is the way I value the person that I believe myself to be. And both self-concept and self-esteem influence the continuous internal dialogue that's providing a sort of running commentary on everything that we do and experience. Self-talk may be negative or positive, and it absolutely influences how we listen, perceive, and process what other people say and do. Positive self-talk is especially helpful for listeners because it helps them to focus on understanding a message, and it allows them to be more open to criticism. Negative self-talk can increase the likelihood of a person becoming defensive or perhaps critical of the speaker. When we can find a way to replace our negative self-talk with positive statements, this may help us to process and filter messages more effectively. Here are some additional listening strategies you can practice. First, check for misunderstandings. Be sure that you're not assuming that you understand a message. You may need to ask questions or practice paraphrasing to make sure that you're actually understanding the message the way the sender intends. Second, check to be sure that you're listening for objective facts and that you're not confusing those with your personal opinions. Sometimes it may be necessary to ask for clarification. For example, saying something like, "So what do you mean by that?" helps me understand whether or not you're trying to present factual information or perhaps a personal opinion. Third, check perceptions. An easy way to do this is to practice a skill called perception checking. Simply let a person know the behavior that you observed or the words that you heard, offer one or two possible interpretations of that, and then ask for further clarification and explanation. Of course, it's important to check your self-talk to be sure that you're not reflecting defensively or with anger. And if you do find yourself feeling defensive, it can be very helpful to ask yourself exactly what it is about this message that's making you feel this way. Finally, you should be checking to see how much of what you hear is a function of what's going on inside you, the sender, and how much is a function of the message itself. We want to make sure that our responses are rational rather than emotional.